The sky above the wide plains turned golden before dusk. The land stretched for miles, dry and quiet, with only the sound of wind passing through old fences and empty fields. The ranch stood alone, a small wooden house with a leaning barn beside it. It belonged to Eli Dawson, a quiet rancher who had lived there most of his life. He had no wife, no children, and no close neighbors. People in town said he was a kind man, but he liked his peace. Since his parents passed away, he had learned to live with silence. His days were spent fixing fences, feeding his few cattle, and watching the sun sink behind the hills. That evening, as he walked toward the barn, he noticed something strange near the far fence. The wind carried dust, but through it, he saw what looked like a small figure sitting near a post. He narrowed his eyes. It was too still to be an animal. Curious but cautious, he took his lantern and started walking closer. The evening light had faded into purple, and the world was quiet except for the crunch of his boots on dry soil. When he reached the spot, he stopped. A young girl was sitting on the ground, her knees pulled close to her chest. She looked weak and tired. Her dark hair hung over her face, and her clothes were torn from travel. She wasn't from the town that much he could tell right away. She was native, likely from the Apache people who lived farther north. Her small hands trembled in the cold wind. She lifted her head and looked at him, her eyes wide and frightened. Eli took off his hat and spoke gently. "You all right, miss?" The girl didn't answer. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Her skin was pale under the lantern light, and she looked like she hadn't eaten for days. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you inside before the cold takes you." He wrapped his coat around her shoulders. She tried to stand but stumbled, and he caught her before she could fall. She was light, too light for her age, and shaking badly. He helped her walk the short distance to the cabin. Inside, the air was warmer. The small fire he had left burning still gave off heat. He set her down on a chair near the fireplace and poured her a cup of water. The girl looked at the cup, then at him, unsure. He nodded. "Go on. It's safe." She drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. There was fear there, but also exhaustion. He could tell she wasn't used to kindness. He went to the small stove and warmed up the leftover soup he had made earlier. It was thin, but it was all he had. When he placed the bowl in her hands, she hesitated for a moment, then started to eat quietly. He sat nearby, saying nothing, letting her finish. When she was done, she looked down at the bowl as if she didn't know how to thank him. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "I'll keep the fire going." The girl nodded faintly. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "Thank you." Her English was broken, but he understood. He found her a blanket and laid it near the fire. She lay down slowly, curling under the warm cloth. Eli pulled up a chair and sat nearby. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he listened to the wind outside, wondering who she was and how she had ended up alone on his land. When dawn came, soft light filled the cabin. The girl was still asleep, her breathing steady. Eli stepped outside to check on his cattle, but as soon as he reached the field, he stopped in shock. His heart jumped. The field that had always held just a few cattle was now completely full. Dozens of animals grazed across his land, calm and peaceful as if they had always been there. Eli blinked several times, trying to understand. He counted them 10, 20, 40, more. There were far too many. He walked along the fence to see if someone's herd had wandered in, but the fence was unbroken, the gate closed, and the ground showed no signs of movement. No tracks, no drovers, nothing. He rubbed his neck and muttered, "What in the world?" When he returned to the cabin, the girl was awake and sitting by the window. She looked calm, watching the sunlight pour across the land. He asked her, "Did you see the herd?" She turned her head slightly and nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "They came. They came." He repeated, "What do you mean they came?" The girl didn't answer right away. She looked back at the window and said quietly, "You helped me, so they come to help you." Eli frowned, not understanding. "You mean the cattle?" She nodded once, her dark eyes steady. He chuckled softly. "That's not how it works out here. Herds don't just appear. The girl didn't argue. She simply said, "Sometimes the land gives back when heart is kind." Then she looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edge of the blanket. The rest of the day passed slowly. Eli spent hours checking each animal. Some were marked with strange brands he didn't recognize, and a few had none at all. They behaved calmly, feeding together as if they belonged there. He even went into town later that week to ask around, but no one reported missing cattle. No one knew anything about them. It was as if they had appeared from nowhere. Meanwhile, the girl stayed at the ranch. She helped clean the dishes, fed the chickens, and gathered firewood. Though she said little, her quiet presence filled the house with warmth that had been missing for years. She was polite, gentle, and moved with a calm grace. Eli noticed that the animals seemed to behave differently around her. The horses came close when she walked by, and even the most stubborn cow followed her voice. One evening, as the sun turned the sky orange, Eli and the girl sat outside on the porch. He finally asked, "What's your name, miss?" She hesitated before answering softly, "Taya." "That's a pretty name," he said with a small smile. "You can stay here as long as you need. No questions asked." She looked at him and replied, "You don't ask why I came." Eli shook his head. "No need to. You looked lost. Everyone gets lost sometimes." For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just watched the sunset paint the horizon red. The new herd grazed quietly in the field, their shadows long in the fading light. Eli felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of peace. The ranch didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. As night came, Taya sat near the window, whispering something in her native language. The sound was soft, almost like a song or a prayer. Eli couldn't understand the words, but he didn't need to. The tone carried something pure. When she finished, she turned to him and said, "You have kind heart. You help when no one look?" He nodded slowly, touched by her words. "Sometimes kindness is all a man's got left," he replied. She smiled faintly. The kind of smile that comes from deep understanding. Kindness brings back what heart lost. That night, Eli lay awake thinking about her words. He remembered all the years he had spent alone, how the land had grown quiet, how he had given up on luck, and how his heart had turned to stone from solitude. But now, there was something different. The fire seemed warmer. The air felt gentler. The strange herd outside was proof that something unseen had changed. The next morning, Eli woke early. Through the open window, he heard a soft sound, Taya's voice again, calm and low. He stepped outside and saw her standing near the herd. The animals circled around her quietly as if they were listening. Her dark hair caught the morning light, and for a moment, Eli stood frozen, watching. It was a peaceful sight, almost sacred. He didn't understand how or why any of it had happened. But he knew one thing for sure: his life had shifted. The ranch wasn't empty anymore. Fate had brought someone to his door, and somehow, kindness had changed everything. Eli watched her turn and smile at him as the sun rose higher over the plains. In that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Days turned into weeks, and the once lonely ranch no longer felt empty. The small cabin now had the sound of quiet footsteps, the smell of warm bread, and soft humming in the evenings. Eli Dawson had not known peace like this for years. The young Apache girl, Taya, spoke little, but her silence carried comfort instead of awkwardness. She woke early every morning, often before sunrise, and worked beside him without complaint. She swept the porch, fed the chickens, and carried water from the well. The ranch had started to bloom again, and even the air felt lighter. Every morning, Eli still looked out at the herd grazing in the field. He had grown used to their presence, but deep inside, he remained curious. No one in town had claimed them. No one asked about missing cattle. It was as though they had been given to him, just as Taya had said. He never fully believed in miracles. But now he began to wonder if there really were unseen hands guiding things. Sometimes he watched Taya walk among the animals. The herd would part as she passed through, their heads lowering as if she were someone they trusted. She would whisper soft words to them in her native tongue, and they seemed to listen. Eli couldn't explain it, but he didn't try to anymore. Some things, he figured, didn't need to be understood. They just needed to be accepted. One quiet afternoon, Eli rode out to the far side of the property. The fences there had been weak for years, and he wanted to see if they needed repair. Taya followed him, walking barefoot through the grass. The sun was high, and the land shimmered with heat. When they reached the far pasture, she stopped suddenly and looked toward the distant hills. "What's wrong?" Eli asked. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "People come," she said softly. Eli shaded his eyes and looked too. At first, he saw nothing. But after a few minutes, he noticed dust rising in the distance. Riders, 3 of them moving fast. He felt uneasy. Visitors were rare out here. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "They look for me." Eli looked at her, surprised. "For you?" Her eyes filled with worry. "I ran away," she said quietly. "They not want me free." "I come far." Eli didn't ask more. He could see the fear in her face, the kind that came from a life of hardship. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "No one's taking you from my land." They hurried back toward the cabin. The riders came closer, and Eli could now see they weren't lawmen or neighbors. Their clothes and horses looked rough, like men who had been traveling hard. They stopped near the fence and called out, asking if he had seen a native girl pass through. Eli stood on his porch and answered calmly, "Ain't seen no one but cattle lately." The men looked past him toward the house. One of them frowned, then nodded and turned his horse. "If you do, let us know." "She took something that ain't hers." Eli didn't reply. He waited until they rode away, their dust fading into the hills. When he turned back, Taya stood in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly. She looked scared but grateful. "You tell lies," she whispered. Eli nodded. "Sometimes that's the right thing to do." That evening, they sat by the fire. The air outside was still, and the moon hung low. Taya spoke in her soft voice, telling him for the first time about her past. Her people had been moved from their land, and she had been taken in by a family that treated her like a servant. She had run away one night, following the stars until her strength gave out. That's when Eli found her. When she finished, her eyes were wet, though she didn't cry. "I had nothing," she said. "But you give me place. You share food, share fire." Eli looked at her, feeling a warmth in his chest that words couldn't describe. "You don't owe me anything, Taya," he said. "Sometimes people just need a little mercy." She shook her head slowly. "You give more than mercy. You give life." He didn't know how to answer. He only nodded and looked toward the fire. In the days that followed, Taya seemed to grow stronger. Her laughter began to fill the house, soft and rare, but beautiful. She learned to ride, and Eli taught her how to mend fences and care for the animals. The ranch began to flourish like never before. The herd grew even larger. Eli found himself wondering if perhaps fate had chosen to reward kindness in ways he couldn't understand. Then one morning, just as the sun rose, Eli woke to an unusual sound voices outside. He stepped onto the porch and froze. A group of people stood near the fence line, Apache men and women dressed in traditional clothes, their faces calm but watchful. Taya was already outside, standing near them. She looked both surprised and peaceful. Eli approached slowly. One of the elders, a tall man with gray hair, spoke to Taya in their language. She listened quietly, then turned to Eli. "They come for me," she said softly. "They my people." Eli felt something twist in his chest. He knew this day would come, but he hadn't wanted to think about it. "So, you'll be going back?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her eyes full of both joy and sadness. "They thought I'd gone forever. They follow the signs to find me." "Signs," he repeated. She smiled faintly. "The herd. It lead them." Eli looked toward the field. The cattle stood together, calm and silent, as if they understood. He couldn't explain it, but he knew she was telling the truth. Maybe those animals had been more than a gift. Maybe they were a bridge between two worlds, his and hers. The elder man came closer and extended his hand in thanks. Though he spoke few English words, his meaning was clear. Eli nodded and shook his hand firmly. There was respect between them, even without words. Before leaving, Taya stood before Eli. Her small hands held a small beaded charm, woven with feathers and thread. She placed it in his palm. "You gave me home when I had none. Now I give you this. Yet keep your heart safe." Eli's throat tightened. "You take care of yourself, Taya." She smiled softly. "The land will remember you." He watched as she walked away with her people, her figure growing smaller against the vast horizon. The herd followed them for a while, then slowly returned to his field, calm as ever. Eli stood there until the sun was high, feeling both loss and peace. Days passed, and though the cabin felt quiet again, it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. The silence now carried warmth instead of sorrow. The herd remained, strong and growing. He noticed the earth turning greener, the crops sprouting better than they had in years. The air around the ranch felt different, alive. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, he took the beaded charm from his pocket and held it in his hand. The light caught its threads, making it shimmer like gold. He smiled softly. In his heart, he knew the truth. The kindness he had shown had returned to him in ways he could never explain. The girl he had helped had been more than a lost travelashee, had been a blessing from the land itself. A reminder that compassion could turn even the loneliest life into something beautiful. Eli lived on quietly, caring for his ranch and the herd that never left. Sometimes at night when the wind blew through the plains, he could swear he heard her voice soft. Distant and full of peace, he would smile, tip his hat toward the open field and whisper, "Thank you, Taya." The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter every time.